problem is misinformation. And when we're talking about like the authority, what I think a lot of people don't understand on the left is that the authority for them has become the media. They just don't realize that they're being ruled and governed by the misinformation from the media. I mean, if you were to ask the average person on the left, why do you hate Donald Trump so much? Why do you espouse so much opposition to his followers? They would tell you that he's akin to Hitler, and that it's their moral obligation to stop Hitler.
Right.
But that misinformation has been instilled in them.
Folks, as you know, I never do panels on this program, but they bullied me into doing one. I said it would never work. I was wrong. I love talking to Dr. Simone Gold and Brandon Straka, who just happen to be here at the same time. But we have some things in common. Simone, you were just talking about the deeper principle behind standing up. For you, it was the Holocaust. It was that background. Brandon, for you, was being bullied as a kid and just seeing the injustice of it, feeling the injustice of it. But why do you suppose so many people on the left, I could say, in the gay community, in the Jewish community, don't make that connection? What does either of you think is at work there? Because you are both leaders in a sense in doing that. So Simone, please.
I think there's a reluctance for parents to actually teach kind of this absolute moral truth to their children. We're all like, hey, whatever feels good, whatever is good, it's all very equal, co-equal. People, for example, I've got children, in the children's school, they would call the teachers by the first name, and I was a huge advocate of trying to get rid of that. I said that that's a problem, that the kids are thinking the teachers are equal. There is a certain kind of hierarchy that you have to teach children, really honestly, for them to go on to have happy, productive lives.
Okay, now this is deep, right? Because we're normally given a choice between this kind of sloppy, false egalitarianism, right? I would argue as a Christian, a genuine egalitarianism comes out of the Bible. We're all equal in God's sight. He loves every one of us equally, period. But some people take that into this kind of, as you just said, a sort of, they are like militantly against any kind of hierarchy or tradition, which pushes them, they just become like Bolshevik idiots, basically.
First of all, then no one's really in charge, or somebody evil is likely to be in charge, because average, good, nice people are not really going to pummel their way and push their way to be on the top, right? It's more like sociopathic people that will do that. So if you don't have a hierarchy in place that's honorable, that's got proper authority in place, then who ends up in charge? Or sociopaths?
Okay, so that idea, again, this all kind of came to the culture in the 60s, but it's like when somebody says question authority, in the 60s they would say question authority. So what that really ought to mean is you question authority to see whether the authority is legitimate or tyrannous. Not question authority as a concept, that all authority is bad. All leaders are bad and need to be taken down a notch. And I think anytime anyone sees someone who is a real leader or who is strong or who has made it or is wealthy or whatever, there's an egalitarian impulse in America to say we need to take them down a notch, which is a kind of a socialistic, Marxist idea. And I think a lot of the hatred of Trump comes from that kind of a sensibility. That's my theory.
Yeah, well, and that ties in, because I wanted to answer your question about the left, too, from my perspective. I actually believe that the majority of people on the left do feel that they are trying to protect social justice and trying to do what they think is right.
Trying to help the downtrodden.
Right, but the problem is misinformation. And when we're talking about like the authority, what I think a lot of people don't understand on the left is that the authority for them has become the media. They just don't realize that they're being ruled and governed by the misinformation from the media. I mean, if you were to ask the average person on the left, why do you hate Donald Trump so much? Why do you espouse so much opposition to his followers? They would tell you that he's akin to Hitler, and that it's their moral obligation to stop Hitler.
Right.
But that misinformation has been instilled in them. I mean, right now, I don't know when this is airing, but there's a situation happening.
It's airing right now.
Wonderful. There's a situation happening in real time in New York City where a black man was on the subway yesterday. He went in there, he was menacing people. A white Marine was there, put him in a chokehold to try to subdue him. and this black man died. Right now, as we speak, the liberal left is going crazy, claiming that another white man killed a black man on the subway. They seem to have no care whatsoever for the fact that all the other people that were put in danger on the subway train. But they've been ingrained to believe through the media that they're protecting the rights of a downtrodden group of people
Right.
anytime a black person is.
This ultimately is a question of narratives, right? I'm old enough to remember when we had Woodward and Bernstein kind of waving the flag of journalistic integrity to bring down corrupt government, and that kind of came into the culture. And the problem is we've always in America believed in the basic integrity of the authorities. Like, we knew that there could be corruption, but what has happened, of course, is that we accorded all of this power to let's call it the media as the champions of truth. And in the decades since Walter Cronkite and Woodward and Bernstein, something has happened so that a lot of Americans still trust the mainstream media, but the mainstream media itself has fallen prey to the temptation of power, which is exactly what they used to be against.
But it was it's like this in all of our institutions. I think there's a certain kind of cherry picking of those applicants to the schools. I mean, journalist schools really favor a very certain kind of political ideology. Medical schools are in the same boat now, favoring a certain kind of political ideology. I think it was Harvard. It was one of the most famous medical schools that literally now is favoring diversity and favoring having classes that are segregated by race. This stuff.
You're kidding.
I am not kidding. I will send you that article.
Okay, so we didn't bring it up, but since you're
Yeah.
sitting here, the medical establishment, no more trusted establishment in America. Many people think of doctors as God. They have the power over life and death. They're all about science. And over the decades, that has eroded. We have seen greed and corporate power take over that world, so that hospitals, which are owned by conglomerates, are telling you, the doctor, what you can do here and here and here and here. And as the doctor, you suddenly realize, wait a minute, that's not working in the best interest of my patient. So there's a whole other gigantic field.
Yeah.
You've lived this.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, and it's as vicious as you call the military-industrial complex. I call it the medical-industrial complex, and I think it's far more dangerous. The military-industrial complex is about 4% of our GDP. The medical-industrial complex, which is run by corporate insurance interests, essentially, like United Health Group, Optum, Kaiser, those financial interests, which are being funded by people's monthly premiums that they're paying, is controlling the medical care that the average person gets, telling the doctor what to do. Infinite examples, telling the doctor what to do, telling the hospital what to do. That doctor-patient relationship has essentially been eviscerated, and it's not just a problem for the patient, it's really a problem for society, because it's taken down of the intelligentsia, really. Like, that's what it's doing, which is always a move that Marxists do.
So the media.
Yeah.
Misinformation. But what makes it really sick to me is they label truth misinformation. In other words, this is the term gaslighting, unfortunately, has become so popular. But that's what makes it particularly, to my mind, diabolical. In other words, it's one thing to say, we disagree with you, whatever, but they're saying you're guilty of what they're in fact guilty of.
Well, it's important to remember, too, that the stories that we hear every day or every night when we turn on the news are decided for us by a small handful of people. And what's happened over time, too, is a lot of these people who are making these decisions are people who are fresh out of college. I mean, people have just spent 4 years being indoctrinated in whatever school that they go to into leftist ideology. I mean, the interns, bookers, these are the people sitting around saying, these are the stories that we're going to tell tonight. Well, no, we're not going to say this positive story about President Trump. We're not going to talk about this positive thing that we did. Here's a story that we can spin into making it seem like Donald Trump did something racist, or that this Republican over here did something to harm black people. And these are the stories that they're going to run with. These decisions are being made by 24-year-olds.
So they've become either Marxist activists,
Yes,
or whores for money who couldn't care less about the actual patient. This is about, we want to make money and we're going to tell you how to do it.
But we've trained the population to be very compliant and to just follow their paycheck or just follow their boss or follow their peers. We've trained the people like that. That's why I'm like saying, parents, you have to teach your children to think for themselves. So I've always been wondering, now that I'm sitting here with you, Eric, and you, Brandon, the LGBTQ, et cetera, all the initials.
XYZ, my name is
I'm
Legion.
not sure. The extensive, I believe as a doctor that movement was hijacked by the whole transgender movement. And I'm just speaking as a physician, I'm very offended at the fact that doctors perform these very high-risk surgeries, which have unbelievably high complication rates that in no other area of medicine would we be allowed to legally do. But they're doing them because they're called experimental. So as long as a person signs away, they can't really bring a malpractice suit against the practitioner, but they should be absolutely illegal. It's assault, it's terrible. But I'm just kind of wondering if you as a gay person feel as though the LGBT movement was hijacked by the transgender movement.
Yes,
What are your
the
thoughts?
short answer is yes, but it's also complicated because I think that there's an enormous amount of people now that are calling themselves transgender who are not even transgender. So it's a little bit complicated. I mean, so now there was a time when I was growing up where there were people who had gender reassignment surgery and they would say they felt like they were born in the wrong body, and we called those people transgender. Now we're calling 14-year-old girls with purple hair and nose ring trans because they say that they fall somewhere on a gender spectrum where they're neither male nor female. That to me is an absolute hijacking. And then the second part of it too is that the whole gay rights movement began with Stonewall in 1969, and it was a group of mostly gay men who got tired of having the bar that they were going to being raided night after night by police. They were being beaten, and finally one night they fought back. Well, now this sort of radical Marxist movement is saying, well, that didn't happen. It was actually black trans women who were fighting back against these officers at Stonewall, and that this history has been whitewashed. And it's not true. So yeah, there's many ways in which I think the gay rights movement has been hijacked.
I just have to say that, again, speaking as a Christian, it's a sin issue when you're talking about greed, because this is not an issue that we typically think of as a sin issue, but I've never in my lifetime seen greed take over the souls of people like doctors. When I think that there are doctors willing to take money to do these surgeries, I am absolutely aghast. And I kind of wonder, how is this different from Dr. Mengele? Like, look, somebody else was going to do it. If I didn't do it, I might as well get in there and make a buck.
Thank you for saying this. It's cash. These are cash procedures. You're absolutely right. It's being driven by greed. They're being paid a lot to do these procedures. It's horrifying.
Okay, so if I go to a doctor, the reason this is so stupid is that if I go to a doctor and say, listen, I identify as a limbless person, so I'm going to pay you money to remove my arms and legs, most doctors would balk at that. Now, there are some super pigs who wouldn't, but the point is, most doctors would say, I think this person has mental issues. I don't think it's possible for me to do something like this. It's physically possible, it's medically possible, but I wouldn't do it.
But also the doctor would be afraid of losing their license, of being brought up on charges, right? They're not afraid of that anymore. They're actually afraid of the opposite, that if they don't do the surgery, that they might get called transphobic. So it's all kinds of incentives. It's the greed.
Ooh, you get called a name.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's
Better to
terrible.
take the money and run. Listen, I just find it, as a man, the idea that men want to compete, for example, as women, I just laugh at it, because not only are there crazy, selfish people who want to do this, but there are other people willing to allow it to happen, to destroy everything.
Yeah, I mean, that particular point is outrageous. Even if you're somebody, say, on the left, or if you're a large advocate for the transgender movement, you should be able to look at least at basic fairness and say, okay, this is an area where we should all be able to agree biological males have advantages in certain ways over biological females, and it's not fair. I mean, it's literally just a matter of fairness. But they're not. They don't care about the fairness. They don't care about anything. It's literally just, this is a movement that almost wishes to devour everything in its path. And I think that's just one aspect of that. But I love the what you brought up about the complications, and I think you should speak more to that, because I mean, I considered myself for a long time to be an advocate for people who felt like a transition was the right choice for them to feel like who they really were, but we never heard about the complications that people went through, and we never talked about the detransitioning people too. I mean, that is something that was absolutely
Well, see, but
buried.
that's the point, is that narrative, we're not allowing them to have a voice. And that's when you know something's wrong. When we say,
Right.
we'll listen to those stories, but we won't listen to those
Right.
stories. Very horrifyingly, in Denmark, an 18-year-old boy died on the operating table because I can't even say on the air what they were trying to do. It is it sounds like a joke, except it's true. He died. So there's going to be evidence against what we see happening, and just that gives me a modicum of hope